Meeting to order at 5:31. All right, we'll start with roll call. Go off last. Attendance. Alejandro. Here. Eric.
Here.
Joey.
Here.
Edgar.
Here.
Monica is going to be tardy. Dane.
Here.
Alex.
Here.
Aubrey.
Here.
Josh. Here. Lacey.
Here.
Cece.
Here.
I'm here. Greg.
Yep.
Jess.
Here.
Perfect. And mine's excused. All right. We will now go to agenda approval. Everyone click over the agenda for March 11th, 2020. Eric?
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
We have a motion on the table to approve the agenda. Alex seconds. Discussion? None. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Alright, so moved. We'll now go to the approval of the minutes of March 4th. We may look over them, voice any questions or concerns. Probably a lot.
Yeah.
Eric?
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
We have a motion on the table. Dane seconds. Discussion. No. All those in favor of approving last week's minutes? Opposed? Abstentions? So moved. We'll now go into reports. I don't really have any reports.
The only brief ones I have is we have a few communications received, some that Lacey will share on there. Just a reminder, again, this is our last meeting of the quarter. We'll reconvene the first Wednesday of next quarter on the 1st. And we'll send out information for you all on what the schedule and everything looks like on that in advance. So keep your eyes peeled. But otherwise, good luck on finals next week and spring break.
So the first update is that I was able to take the supplemental requests to the President's Budget Committee yesterday, and they voted to approve the ones that were on the list. So as of right now, everything has been pushed up to the President. And then the other piece that I'd like to bring up is we have been dealing with a handful of events and trips that are being canceled due to the coronavirus. So one of the first ones is actually request 2010. As you can see, we have not rolled back the funds on these, all of them yet, because we're still in the process of identifying if there was any expenses or any refunds, so that will take some time. But they alerted us that the conference actually is canceled for this specific request. And then the next one that's going to be on the list is going to be actually Women in Jazz Day. So Women in Jazz, if you remember, actually has a couple of requests, and they are they have actually already decided to cancel. But again, they're in the process of trying to figure out what expenses are actually due in the process of the contracts. So no funds at this time have been rolled back, but we will continue doing that throughout the next few weeks. And then the next one that we have is 2025, which is actually, they declined the funding due to the conference being canceled, so that funding has rolled back. And then the final one is actually the SIP Shops training, and they have not canceled the event, they have actually rescheduled it for next year. The tentative date is spring of 2021. So that all kind of gives us down at the bottom of the total. So as you guys remember, last week we actually, the committee voted to allocate the remaining of their budget, and so right now we've already rolled back a total of $8,637.30. And I would expect to see that continue throughout the quarter. So there's quite a bit. This is actually the stuff that's happening in just a handful of days. So I would expect to kind of see more communication, especially when we come back from spring break. Is there any questions?
So for these recent ones that were I guess approved last week, it's all gonna be case by case still, right?
So as far as we have it right now, it is case by case. The communication, which I believe we shared last week with international travel is on hold through spring quarter. So they will reevaluate that come for the future quarters. But I don't have any updates at this time on that. I don't know if you do.
No.
But as far as events or other conferences, it is really just a case by case. So some of these conferences, as you guys remember, are in other locations. So those other locations are actually deciding on if those conferences are taking place, which is happening kind of pretty much every day. So again, case by case, but I will be sure to update the committee whenever I hear any news.
Any questions? Josh?
Do we track when these conferences are being held? Like the month, April, May, June?
So that's actually something that we don't have it electronically right now. I mean, we do in my office, we track all the travel trips, but that's a little different than just the events as well. So that is something that we will actually start collecting. It is something that we have on paper, so we could go back and verify, but it's not as necessarily as easy to do that. But I will actually consider doing that in this spreadsheet so that we can see when these events occur a little bit easier. Because that's been a question about from the President's Budget Committee is, when are they happening? Are they happening winter quarter, spring quarter, or where are they going? So we might even add some locations depending on what it looks like.
And is there a process for the club or the org or the student group or the students that are going to these conferences to notify you when they've been notified that they're canceled? Because I'm assuming you're not monitoring all the conferences that we've awarded.
So there's not that's actually something that's come up. There's not an official process necessarily for those types of things. Right now it's just email communication. But on the other side of things, we will email when the event has been, so if it's a trip, we will kind of ping them to make sure that they get their reimbursements in. So there's a state law that they have to actually have their reimbursements in within 6 months. We obviously ping them earlier than that. But most of the time we actually don't necessarily have that problem. That's pretty, we'll say maybe 1% of the scenario. Usually they're pretty, they communicate well when they know that they have a reimbursement pending.
Sweet. Any other questions? Josh?
Sorry. On the reimbursement, if some costs are not reimbursed that they spent due to a cancellation of the trip, how do we operate those? Do we reimburse them for things that they paid for but they didn't actually go through with the trip?
So in normal practices, the answer is no. But in this specific scenario with the coronavirus, it's actually changed a little bit. So if it's canceled due to something like the coronavirus, we have actually been authorized to be able to reimburse those expenses. Now, if you would take a different year and they just chose not to go, but they paid registration, the answer would be no. With travel specifically, we actually, it's a policy and procedure to ensure that they went on the trip and the expenses are real. But in this circumstance, it's a little case by case. We have to verify that the expenses are non-refundable before we can reimburse them. So it's going to be a longer process than we've necessarily anticipated, but we will work through that with circuit counting and verify that with each traveler and each person that is part of the request. The other piece, just to, I mean, I kind of hit heavy on the travel, but it's also the contracts as well. So that is one thing that we're vetting through the contracts office. And there are each contract is different, and so that's where it's even case by case, and it's even person by person. So we are in a holding pattern for some of these events until we have confirmation from the contracts office of what is required for us to pay, if there is anything.
And the reports. We'll move on to the next part of the agenda. Public comment first call. Is there any public comment this time? Open up to the gallery. Seeing none, we'll move on to new business. Subsection A, base funding program reviews, starting with marching band. Do your arts.
So, I am not here to represent marching band tonight. I'm here for mariachi. I have texted the marching band director to see if they're running late. I apologize, but I am the chair of the music department, but I don't administer or really have much to do with the marching band. So I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'll let you know when you're back. I don't know what's going on.
That was your best stall tactic?
You had a flat tire.
Yeah.
I don't know. Sorry.
Can we just go to
Yeah.
the theater arts?
Yep.
Alright, we'll then go to theater arts and then we'll hit marching band.
Okay, so this is my first time doing this. How do I do this? Do I stand up there? Do I
Yeah,
sit
because they got
there?
the camera recording you,
Okay.
so
Thank
stand
you,
up there.
sorry.
And talk. No, you're totally good too.
I was really
Yeah.
sort of hoping marching band.
Right. Yeah.
Yikes. Hello everyone. I'm Christina Barragan. I'm the chair of theater arts, and I have handouts because I got overexcited. If you want to pass them around, they're essentially the notes I'm speaking from. So what we have done with the money that you've given us is pretty much the title of the talk, right? And I'm pleased to say that every single dollar that S&A allocates to theater arts goes and ends up in the pocket of a student. So it goes to student payroll, it goes to subsidizing student tickets, it goes to fund student travel, and it also goes to appreciation of students. So I'll start at the top with employment. So we get $68,857 per year to spend on our stuff, and about $51,800 of that goes to student employment. I say about because that was last year's figure. That basically funds 31 student employees, and they work in our scene shop, our costume shop, our lighting shop, our sound shop, and in the front office and in McConnell events. So when we have rental clients, they are the folks who are backstage helping them realize the event and their vision for the event. And these, we think these employment opportunities are really important, not only because they support the students in their financial lives here at Central Washington University and being able to navigate school from a financial point of view, but also because they offer them the opportunity to work in a professionally styled shop. They prepare students to work in entertainment and in the entertainment fabrication industries. And we also find that they're incredible resume builders for our students because they get the opportunity not only to build their skills, but also do that accomplishment thing. The accomplishments are really important for resumes these days, and in these positions, they get the opportunity to creatively problem solve, bring projects in on budget and on time, and to lead teams of people, all creating fabulous accomplishments that are what employers are looking for out in the world today. So if they wanted to go into entertainment or entertainment fabrication, they are released that, but also they can go and be an attractive candidate for project management at Boeing and so on and so forth. One of the other important things that we think is important about this opportunity is that there are no other competing professional fabrication shops like this in Ellensburg or within a reasonable drive of Ellensburg. So we believe it's really important to offer our students the opportunity to exercise and build the resumes and their professional skills in this way. So we're incredibly pleased to offer them that opportunity. And the ballpark was about 4,248 hours worked last year, which, yeah, all students. The ticket subsidy, we subsidize approximately 47% of a full price ticket to all theater arts productions. This means the student pays between $7 and $8 per student ticket, and that means that it begins to pull down some of the financial barriers that students have to coming to enjoy our events. It's noted at the bottom that if we were to have an increase in our allocation, then one of the things we could do is lessen that ticket price for a student. So take it from like an import beer down to a soda, right? So that would be a goal we'd be interested in achieving. So last year, this helped 1,823 students buy tickets to one or more of our 5 shows in our season. Student travels also funded field trips to businesses in Seattle. Earlier last month, it was just barely March. Earlier last month, a group of students went to go view some theater and a professional fabrication shop over in Seattle. People who make permanent installations for museums and for entertainment venues, and had a really good day looking at what those environments look like and talking with people who worked there, and began to make some really lovely connections. So that's the sort of student travel. We also disperse funding to help people attend professional conferences. So either regional, like the Kennedy Center American College Theater Festival Conference, it's a regional thing, kind of Northwest, and national conferences like like United States Institute for Theater Technology and the national version of the Kennedy Center stuff. So again, networking, looking at how your skills fit in with the rest of the world and starting to build the building blocks for moving on past their college careers. At goods and services, our expenditure of $3,500 was to fund student recognition, so awards and recognition for achievements throughout the year. It's room rental and catering and the purchase of the awards. All of that goes back to the students. No student pays to attend that event. They all get in there for free. And from the big questionnaire we were sent earlier this year, right?
Yeah.
The dates. One of the questions was what would happen if the funding was increased. Well, you all may know that minimum wage has risen as of January 1. There are other increases potential there, but also since we're in the third year of 4-year allocation, we didn't necessarily dream that it would rise quite as much as it has. So an increase in that in allocation would allow us to keep abreast with the rising minimum wage, which would be super. It would allow us to offer more students more hours in our shops and employment opportunities, and it would allow us to increase the ticket subsidy, but then decrease the student costs at the box office. And these are all things that theater arts would love to see happen because it increases access of students to some of the really wonderful things that we have to offer as a student community. I think that's about it. I know it wasn't 10 minutes.
So,
Oh, and I'm being told to like draw it out.
Yeah.
And then the flat tire is really impeding marching band. Yeah, so is it questions?
yeah, so we have 10 minutes of questions.
Okay. What can I answer for you?
Alejandro?
So the 1,823 students buying tickets, that's not unique students, is it?
Sorry?
Like the number on the ticket subsidy says 1,823 students bought tickets.
Yeah.
But is that just like the amount of student tickets? Like that's not unique students?
That is the amount of student tickets. We don't have a way to track whether the same student bought 5 tickets or bought 1 ticket at this time. We can increase that as a level of granular analysis, but we would need to do that for the future.
Alex?
And then most of these shops, they're working during like productions that the theater department's putting on, or what's the majority of the time spent?
Oh, they start at the beginning of classes and they end at the end of classes. And
Okay.
they have hours throughout regardless of what is happening on our stages.
Is the majority of those, are those like outside events that come in? Where do you see like most of that work going?
Oh, that's an awesome question. I think I want to talk to you in percentages, but I know I don't have the numbers, so I'm gonna like trip myself up. But because the outside groups that come in and rent the space fluctuate from year to year. We have some clients who come in and have every other year tempo with us. For example, last year was a Nutcracker year. Next year's going to be a Nutcracker year, so they're going to increase the number of the McConnell events rental hours. This year, maybe we're a little bit lower. But the majority of the work is in the fabrication shops situation. And it's worth noting here that not everybody we employ is a theater major. We have other majors who do that work alongside everybody. Oops, tripped myself up. But does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Good question.
I guess for me, like, what's kind of like the position on your budget right now? Do you have stuff to carry over, or are you guys just making it through with like the minimum wage increase and everything?
With this S&A?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we will probably spend it all this year.
Okay.
The increase in minimum wage has caused quite a kerfuffle, for lack of a more descriptive term, in the shops. There was a moment when we knew it was happening, right? Because it wasn't a secret, but the reality of it really set in at the beginning of the winter quarter. And there was a moment where the earnest reckoning of how many more potential hours we had to spend happened. And I think that there's been an hours reduction in the spring because of the increased minimum wage.
Alex?
So this S&A allocation, is it supplementing funds that are coming from the theater department? What are the other sources that kind of go into?
Into student employment and these other things?
Yeah.
At the moment, nothing.
Okay.
The only allocations the Theater Arts has from other sources are there to pay for a photocopier and our phones and our copier paper, and that's it. And any requests that have requested more than that have not been able to be accommodated. So really, this is it. This is the sum total of everything that we spend on student employment.
I guess related to that, sorry. Could you kind of explain the relationship between theater arts and say like the academic theater department? Like what's the relationship there?
Between student employment and the academics.
Yeah, I guess
Question you're
is theater arts the academic department that is putting on the okay.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. So I'm going to speak to the way the student employment fits in with or has a relationship with the academics. Right. We have classes that teach people skills, and they happen in regular chunks of time, and they're taught by instructors, right? And forgive me if I'm building, so forgive the granularity here. Those things happen, especially in the technical areas. Those things happen generally in the mornings, and until about 1 o'clock. And we have some students who do kind of lab work, that is guided lab work, sometimes in the afternoon. And that is all for credit, and they are exploring things, and they are really the thrust of that activity is learning to figure out how to do the thing. We have employees that shop hours are generally between 1 and 5, so that they are separate from the class times. The employees are clock in, and they have their own projects. They work either on their own or they work with small groups of people. Generally other employees too, because any lab students who might be present in the shop are kind of doing their own activities. So while they might be sharing the space, their efforts are in parallel, but not necessarily. We don't view that as there's excellent educational benefits, as there is in doing anything, but there is not curriculum for the employees.
Okay.
Beyond the safety training that's required of everybody, there's no curriculum for those folks.
Okay.
Does that address the
Yes.
question you're asking?
Thank you.
Okay, fabulous.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great.
So Joe, you have. Okay. Okay.
If they shut before the end.
He's here. He's here.
Oh, you can go now. Yeah.
And I'm gonna help you.
Yeah.
With my limited
Oh,
knowledge.
then yeah. Everyone jump to
Okay,
that.
yeah, so we'll go continue
Yeah,
the base funding program reviews.
Cause I know how tight your meetings
Yeah.
are. I don't know.
No, I appreciate it.
So Lucas happened to be on the circ, and he's the drum major. I'm not sure where the miscommunication happened, but it certainly wasn't intentional.
Yeah.
So I can just speak, about the marching band in general and what they've used their funds for in general. Do you have a budget in front of you?
Yeah, we're going over them next.
Okay. So they've spent a great deal of money updating the marching band, uniform-wise, getting enough uniforms for the group because it's experienced quite a bit of growth in the past few years. But also instrument-wise, they've had to replace really some instruments. I know, for example, they've had instruments that were over 30 years old that were literally patched with duct tape. From my standpoint, it actually was a little embarrassing to see them in front of that audience with the mismatched. And they were the old sousaphones that were made of fiberglass that were not great instruments anyway, but I mean, we definitely got our money's worth out of those instruments. So they bought new sousaphones, they bought new percussion equipment, updated a lot of their equipment. They also have done a lot of recruiting of non-majors to be in the marching band. This was always an issue with me. For some reason, there's this rumor that always goes around at orientation. I don't know why, but that you have to be a music major to be in any of our groups, and that's completely not true. Matter of fact, we depend heavily on our non-music majors. So this year was the largest marching band that we've had maybe ever, about, I think 220,
Yeah, 240 with staffing and
240
yeah.
members. And of that, roughly about 170, 180 are music majors, and the rest are non-majors. They rehearse every day of the, well, they get together during Wildcat Weekend. So those first 2 days, Monday and Tuesday, that we start classes on Wednesday in the fall. They go all day Monday, all day Tuesday, rehearsal. And then when classes start, they go from 3 to 5 every day, so 10 hours a week of rehearsal. And then on Saturdays, on game day, they get together at 8 o'clock in the morning and rehearse for a couple hours. And then, of course, they attend every home game, pep rallies, bonfires, and spirit events that happen in the fall. The other upgrade with the marching band, modernization, is they've added a lot of electronic equipment as well. This is something that marching bands are doing all over the country, but they've added some equipment to the sidelines so they can have like featured soloists and things like that. And that was an expense, a part of the modernization of the group. So, do you think of anything else I left out, Lucas?
We employ student employees within the marching band, and so we have our student leadership. So that includes like your section leaders and your drum majors like myself. But then you also have additional staff that they like help design the show, or that they help like things function during the off season, and they're super vital to the success of the marching band. Like you have to put 220 uniforms on students within. This season we had 5 days to get 220 uniforms checked out, put on everyone, make sure everything fits. And so we have like a team of librarians and people who write the show, and we have all of these student employees who help make it all possible, because it wouldn't be all possible with just volunteer students. Like it's a full-time job for some. Well, not a full-time job, but it's a big job.
Hours.
Yeah, it's a lot of hours. Yeah, and like he was saying, so we had our initial supplemental request that for new instruments. So we really modernized the marching band. So we put a whole new electronic sound system. The old sound system was small, and it wasn't up with the times of the new modern marching band era. So a lot of like high schools, drum corps, things like that are moving towards that. So it really helps keep our students really up to date with what is important in the ever-changing world of the arts.
And I don't know, I mean, if I have to say so myself, that if you could put our marching band up against any other university's marching band, and I think you'd be very proud how they represent the university. It's a great group. The crowd loves them. It's another kind of unique thing about our marching band that I have never seen before in any other place I've ever been, is at halftime at a regular football game. There's a big crowd of people going to the bathroom and going to get hot dogs, and there's a big rush at halftime. At our football games, there's not a rush until after the band performs. And then after the band performs, the crowd gets up and goes. So I think that says a lot about the quality of the group. And I think there's a lot of pride from our students and our alum about the quality of that group. It's a great representation of the university for that crowd.
And if I might add to that, we've also started implementing a lot more community outreach within the Ellensburg and Kittitas and Cle Elum communities. So within the past 2 years, like we've had the Cle Elum High School, like middle school and high school students, Kittitas Secondary School and Ellensburg High School and Morgan Middle School. We've had groups of those students come out and hang out with the marching band for a day. And I personally think it's just changed kids' lives just out in the community, is like getting to hang out with all these college students and like playing like amazing music and hearing the sound. I think it's been something that we're really proud of. Is
Do they come to the games too?
Yeah, they come to the games.
Come
Yeah,
and
so
play?
they'll come to the games and play the games with us. Which
That's kind of neat. Yeah. All right. So questions.
I agree.
I don't know if you can answer this, but and I don't know if you remember that we sent out some supplemental questions. Is there a reason that the marching band and the pep band and another music department didn't answer half of the questions?
From when I looked over the questions, I could see that there was a fair amount that were answered, and then there was a few that just were really short answers, from my memory. But
I mean,
Marching band and pep band?
Yeah.
Music department answered that.
I mean,
This was the supplemental questionnaire is what you're talking
yeah.
about, right? The one
The
that's
question it's like if we were to increase your
Yeah.
by 15 or 20%, what would
I know that department did theirs, so I don't.
no, yeah, I just looked at that email, and it talked about if we were to add 15 to 20% to our budget, it would talk about adding more student employment so that we can allow more students to gain more valuable experiences involving the marching band. The other part about increasing the 15 to 20% is our uniforms are they're over 10 years old at this point, and we're actually running really low on uniforms, and they're in need of many repairs. And so part of that would be allowing to use that funding to purchase new uniforms, because the uniforms when they were purchased were very expensive, but that was uniforms at the time. They're all wool, it's expensive, but newer uniform technology is a lot cheaper. And so with that 15 to 20% increase, we could effectively clothe our marching band and make sure that they have really nice form-fitting and just a more modern look to fit the modern sound. Does that answer that question?
Not really. I'm just trying to figure out why the questions weren't answered.
Did they not submit the questions? Is that what you're saying? They didn't submit their answers?
They only answered maybe 1 through 4, and then the rest, there were like 10 in total, or 11.
I can't answer that question.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because from what I was sent, it looked
Yeah, I
like all 10
figured.
were answered, but
Thank you.
I'm blank.
Lacey?
So I heard you talk about football games and all of that in the fall. Is there any opportunity for those types of events maybe in the spring for something for the marching band?
I know that we are always looking for community outreach events and things to make ourselves more involved. The difficulty is from fall to spring, we lose a lot of either our non-major students who they get involved into a major that conflicts or the class just doesn't meet. And so it would be wonderful to do things like, say, involved with track and field or other sporting events. I don't know, we definitely as a leadership team talked about doing that sort of thing. Like doing, I don't know, we just don't know what's it like, what our horizon is, like what we can do.
Pep band. I mean, pep band's pretty busy in the winter. All the students get pretty busy in the spring, especially the music majors. So, but marching band, as far as a parade would go, or if there was some kind of a community like the rodeo parade, if we were in school at the time, we would love to do that. You know what I'm saying? But there's not really that kind of opportunity for marching band in the spring.
Not a question, but just a follow up to clarify on Anchors. We ended up getting 2 versions of it. Shannon had sent initial answers, which was the first one because she wanted to get it by the deadline, and then we got the second one after. She just wanted to make sure we had it by the deadline. So, yeah.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
I'm sorry for that.
No, it was miscommunication.
I can see how that could be confusing.
Right. Yeah. There's one put in there, and then the next one.
Yeah. Any other questions? Anybody want to join the marching band next fall? Let's do it.
I don't. Yeah.
Symbols. Alright, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for allowing me that.
Alright, we'll now move to subsection B of new business, base funding adjustments update for Campus Community Garden.
Hi, I'm Kate Dowdy. I'm the Wildcat Farm Manager. I'm just here, Becky is here to support as well, to ask for a change to use of the community gardens funds. So the community garden has joined forces with the Wildcat Farm just for consistent leadership to bring the 2 programs together where we can collaborate and make it a little bit easier since we're all on the same site. And originally the funds, which are $12,000 to $12,270 for the year, were allocated towards goods and services for programming and engaging students with the garden and improving activity in the space. But we haven't really used a lot of that funding, or they haven't used it in the past because there wasn't really the time or capacity to organize those things and to put the time into kind of creating that engagement around the space. And so we're asking that we can use that funding for part of that funding for a student employee who would be doing the coordination with the garden participants, organizing events and activities at the garden, collaborating with community members who are interested in partnering with the garden to make those things happen and to make the program as effective as it can be. And I also just want to clarify that none of the S&A funds will be used by the farm for the farm activities, so the two are still separate in what they do. The farm grows for dining, the garden is for people to learn how to grow for themselves. So those things will be separated, but it's more so just that I can manage and oversee student employee and provide that consistent leadership that they would need to do what they need to do for the garden. And it would be like 15 to 20 hours a week for that person as well.
And if I can help say something, help answer questions, or maybe statement that might help answer questions. The garden is amazing, as you all know. It's a really neat thing, but it can barely kind of survive without an actual employee, and it really does need that. And so it's been very, very cool, especially in the new physical location. So much visibility. People are loving it, but it can't do more than just exist, really, until it has someone who can actually put time and capacity to it. And so that's really why the money goes largely unspent. I mean, we spent a fair amount of it the first year to buy a shed and do all kinds of things, and tools and do small events, but especially this last year and on into the future, without someone actually compensated to be the outreach voice making events happen, there's no real reason to have programming money if you can't have a person making that programming happen. We really need that. And the students who have been involved in taking kind of a volunteer leadership role, even though they haven't been compensated, they get so much out of it, and they love being in the garden. They love being with people. They love helping other people see what it's like to be out there and be in the soil. But it really needs to be able to have a solid voice and face that can stay with it all the time.
Yeah, and to thank you and to go off of that a little as well. We ended up, myself and the student who was working with me at the farm, we ended up volunteering some of our time to take care of the space, because that's also a big part of it is, making sure that the community care aspect of participating in the garden is followed. The site can get out of control very quickly, and so just making sure that stays, that we're all on top of that as well. Some questions.
And this is less a question, but more just a point for you all. So really, they're coming in to request a change from what not the amount of the allocation, but what it's used for, which would mean someone need to make a motion to allow for them to use the funds in the manner they're asking. Otherwise, they're not allowed to, which is why they're coming forward. So it's a presentation, but really putting forward a request for a motion.
So you're asking for all your goods and services funds to be moved to wages? Is that
Yeah, or a portion of it, because it wouldn't take up all of the funds, so then we'd still be able to provide seeds and keep the garden free for people to use, but just a portion of them would be paying this.
So how do we do this without a portion now?
We would just push it to approve their request.
Yeah.
So
I guess
So
My question was just, does it allow them to use that line?
So really what the potential request is to change the definition of the funding. So right now the definition of the funding really highlights on goods and services, and so basically the change would be to change the definition to include student wages within that same description. Because they're not necessarily changing the intent, they're just changing basically the line item.
Do you all have any questions? Greg?
Can we come up with a specific dollar amount,
I don't know if that's right.
or is that not what we?
I wouldn't necessarily recommend a specific dollar amount. I would just recommend, if you guys are in support of allowing a student employee, just to basically say that that would be added on to the description.
Do you have any questions? Alright. Discuss more. Alex?
See if this works. I move to approve the request to allow our base funding allocation to include employment along with goods and services.
I have a motion on the table. Jess, is that a second? Jess seconds. Discussion on the motion.
Second.
Greg?
Employment, is that student employment or any employment?
I think
We need to-
Student employment was the request.
student employment.
Any further discussion on the motion? Alright, seeing none, we'll move to voting. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? None. So moved.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Alright, we will now move to the next part of the agenda, which is old business, starting with subsection A, continuing our supplemental budget discussion. I guess really to preface this, everything that we see here, we can pretty much guarantee that we would hear after our motion from last week. So just keeping that in mind, where we want to go with the direction of our budget. I can leave that up to the committee. Is if we want to, I guess, expand our budget or keep it the same, and then continue with business from that point on. And with that, I'll open up to discussion. Committee, starting with Lacey.
So for the requests that have not been voted on yet, and this is also including ones that were added that we talked about that were in the queue. So those are the ones kind of in that orangish color. That is equaling $99,494. Just for a point of reference.
Dave?
Those are the ones that we are voting on tonight, as well as the ones we haven't seen yet.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
But these are like the requests for the year.
Right. Yeah. Right.
The rest of them.
Yep.
Lacey.
The ones in orange are all pretty much ready to go. There is one that I'm asking for clarification on a line item within their budget, so it could potentially change by the time that's spring. But I just want to let you know that's right. As of right now, that's what's on the budget that they're requesting from.
Joe?
Two things. One is just to keep in mind that what you all are discussing is not whether you're going to fund anything. It's solely what you're going to do with the actual supplemental budget. So choosing to increase or anything does not mean things will be funded. And I say that because I don't want us to go down that rabbit hole, and because we asked Lacey to put these up here so we know what the total dollar figure is. I don't want you all necessarily looking and thinking, well, I do want to fund that one maybe, but not that one, because those haven't had the chance to present. So the number is really there so we have an idea of what could be coming forward, but should not be any decision making on the actual increase of the budget.
Lacey.
And another piece that I want to make sure I kind of reiterate from my report earlier is that my office will be continually rolling back funding, which is a pretty normal process for us. But with this current situation with coronavirus, it's actually happening a little bit more frequently than what we would necessarily anticipate. So just to kind of keep that in mind, that budget could look very different by the time we come back from spring break, because this is kind of when there's quite a bit of events that are happening between now and April that are on this list, that are at least in discussions of whether they're going to continue or not.
Josh.
So if I'm reading what you're saying is that there's a possibility that some things we've approved to fund will be canceled, and that will necessitate that there may not be any reason to increase the budget based on what we're seeing here.
I would say you could still increase the budget, but just be mindful that there could still be funds rolling back. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's not important to increase it, but I would just say keep in mind that it's kind of a fluid budget where we're, as soon as we know that these requests are wrapped up, and wrapped up means that they've either concluded, they've traveled, or they've canceled, we will release that funding back to this budget.
Eric?
I would like to make a motion to increase the budget by $150,000. This is not saying that we should approve all the future requests, but I think it behooves us to have an increase in the budget, because there are people that are going to be coming and making presentations when we come back in spring, and I don't want them to waste their time with the possibility that there's $0 in the budget.
Got a motion on the table to expand the budget by $150,000. Do we have a second? Edgar seconds. Alright, well, the discussion on the motion. Sorry, Joey?
And I'll just ask the obvious question to Lacey: is that an amount that would be fiscally irresponsible, or would that cause us any issues that you can foresee if it's $150,000, or is that within a recommended amount?
I would say that would be an appropriately recommended amount.
Continue with discussion on the motion. Okay, Edgar, is this
Yeah, it's,
alright?
this isn't about if we're gonna accept any more. No, just making sure.
Joey?
Yeah, just to clarify, these are all the requests we will see this year, based on the motion that was made and approved last week, and that's been shared and publicized out. There will be no additional supplemental requests coming forward. So this is all that we have. Also, this does not mean you all need to spend the full amount in any way. I don't want that to be viewed in that manner.
Any further discussion? Greg?
What's the total of what is?
Is still remaining.
Yeah. Oh, they're right there.
99.
Okay, 99.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? Alright, seeing none, we'll move to voting. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Alright, so the motion is denied. We'll continue with discussion on whether we're going to expand or keep the budget the same. Open up to the committee. Dane?
I'd like to make a motion for $100,000 to increase the budget.
We have a motion for 100,000 extension. Do we have a second? Eric seconds. Discussion on the motion to expand the motion budget by 100,000. Joey?
I would just remind everyone to make sure you all are discussing it so people know why we're voting for or against. You don't need to repeat if multiple people have said it. Please don't do that. Simply so if there are questions or things, they can be addressed.
Dane?
Well, only got 99,000 left anyways. We're gonna get money back from coronavirus canceling some events.
Can we start calling?
Can we
them
just say that events being canceled?
that? Not one. Not one.
Yeah.
That's why I motioned for 100. I thought 150 is maybe too much.
Eric?
That's fair.
Further discussion on the motion? Alejandro?
I'm kind of against such a big amount. Like, I'm not entirely against increasing the budget, but like, I mean, like the point's been brought up before. When we have more money, I feel like we are more inclined to like allocate it more easily. So like, I think if we were to do a smaller amount, I think that would encourage us to kind of think more, I guess, critically. So, think more.
Joey? Clarification.
Well, it wasn't necessarily a clarification, it was a response, but
Yeah.
if you want me to go before Dane. I mean, I would say, in a general sense, I would encourage you all to be critical regardless of what the budget is at on that end of things, which I think you have, but I get the point you say, Alejandro. within there, but I think we should be critical on all of these regardless of whether there's funding or not. I think you all just need to be mindful to think about the potential of if you don't, and this is not an encouragement because I can't say one way or the other, but if we increase it by a smaller amount and then you spend that and it comes back up because you want to hear the other requests, that you'd be in the same boat that we're in now. So again, this does not mean you all need to spend any of the money. You could choose to end up denying all of these at some point, which is your all's decision. But I would encourage you to be critical regardless of whether you increase it by $1 million or not. It's absolutely a valid point that I think just from the beginning.
Thank you, Eric.
Was that did you mean to say $1 million?
Oh, I said even if we increased it by $1 million, we should still be critical.
Okay.
Yes. So I did mean to say that, but no, that is not the motion on the table. Yeah.
Any further discussion? Greg?
I guess just for discussion's sake that I abstained because this is, as faculty, I feel like it is student money and I would like the students at the table to make the decision.
Josh?
I'm doing the same, obviously. I've been abstaining from the budget increases or decreases because I feel like it should be 100% student decision.
Further discussion? Jess?
I'm kind of in the same boat as I was 2 weeks ago, and I don't feel that we should increase it because then we're just taking away from future students, just to get that out there, I guess.
Did you want to do that? Oh,
No.
okay. Alright. So like Jess was just kind of saying like she still feels the same way she did before and how like I guess increasing the budget still feels like it's taking away from future students. And so she's gonna vote the same way she has in the past. Future discussion or further discussion?
Yeah, I was like,
Alex?
Call the question.
Alright, we'll vote on the motion to extend the budget by $100,000. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Alright, I vote in favor to approve it by $100,000. With that, we'll move to subsection G, supplemental funding request voting. We'll start with request 2050, new position for Pierce Campus Science Student Line, $35,000. Yeah, like everyone can talk about how they feel about the request. Eric?
I see the importance of this for the West Side student life with the increased participation in activities on the West Side at Edmonds and Highline. I don't know at this time of the year that we should be approving that amount of money when we have just 1 quarter left in the fiscal year. If I'm saying that right. 1 quarter left in the fiscal year. So, yeah.
Joe?
And Lacey, I know you're pulling it up since some don't have it. This would, can you correct me on this, Lacey? Given that this would be increasing a staff position, is this one that they already have someone else so they would use it this year? Or is this one, if approved, they'd hire someone, which is really a next year? This money would go for a position next year. I don't recall.
So they can't actually hire somebody until they have the approval. So they do not, as far as I know, currently have someone to fill this position. So this position, as I understand it, would be part-time, and if approved, they would start the search process. So that could potentially go into summer, fall, winter of next year, and so forth, depending on when the approval, if the approval happens.
And but are they just asking, is this like salary for like the remainder of the year? Is this like a full year salary?
So as far as I understand it, it's going to be a whole year's salary, except it would be part-time. It would not be a full-time position. And so this would be supplementing their base funding to be able to absorb another a part-time position for the centers.
Jess?
So, is it for a year starting like next fiscal year? Or will they have to come back and ask for it again at any point, or?
as far as I understand it, this would get them through the quadrennium, so it would be all the way through fiscal 21.
Jess?
So then are they asking for it within their next like base pay allocation? When they ask for that again? Or how would that work? Do they automatically get that then or I
Well,
okay.
I mean, no, they don't automatically get it, and I would honestly want them to answer that question. I feel like that would be something that we would need to.
Good.
And I'm into that because I asked that when they were
Okay.
here. I couldn't remember the timing of when they hired, but that was their piece. Is their plan is to ask for this already in the base funding piece when it comes up next year. This is really the request was to start the position now, so it's
So
benefiting
it's
the
just them
students
having
now,
it next year versus
Yep.
two.
and to be able to show is this effective or not. But it would not be an automatic. If this were to be approved, this is a one-time supplemental funding, which still means their base funding request would be the same when they come in.
I just
Yeah,
wasn't sure that was different with
Nope.
positions.
I appreciate that.
Any further discussion? Alejandro?
I think this seems pretty important, given that like our students at the satellite campuses pay the S&A fee as well, and it seems like they're not really supported as well as they should be. I think it could definitely go a long way and help them a lot.
Okay.
Over 1,200 students involved in that for a full year. That's a lot of effect. So yeah, I'd like to make a motion to fully fund the 35,000.
Edgar seconds. Discussion on the motion. Fully fund request 2050. Seeing none, move to a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? So moved. Fund full amount. We'll now move to request 2053 performance uniforms for Mariachi Club, $10,980. Open on the floor to discussion. Alejandro?
Considering we just heard that we paid for the marching band's uniforms before, it was that different of a request. They perform at activities that we have on campus, like the Daily Sports Girls and like the Latinx Grad, just other events throughout the year. So apart from them benefiting with having the uniforms, I think other students would like to see like I guess better performance, like it was said that they kind of enhances their look and it just makes them look more professional. They are expensive for students to pay for, so.
Discussion. Eric?
Yeah, we've in the past funded new instruments for the marching band and uniforms, and I think that this is a worthy way to spend money that's going to support students here at Central now and in the future. And I think the amount we're paying would be a good return over the however many years that these uniforms would last, since they're better quality than the current ones were when they were created, according to what they were saying at the presentation. So I'd like to make a motion for $10,980.
We have a motion on the table, from amount. Can you say that second? Dane seconds. Discussion on the motion to fund full amount for request 2053. Eric?
I just want to add that this is actually would, I think, benefit the greater student body, because when they're performing here and they're, representing the school, but they perform here on campus quite a bit, different events, and that's, I think it's a good thing to support.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, move to voting. All those in favor of funding request 2053, the full amount? Opposed? Abstentions? So moved. Fund the full amount, $10,980. We'll now move to request 2055 Mariachi Club Mexico trip for $6,178. Monica?
So I work at the international office, and I was looking up through their application, and noticed that they were gonna receive credit. I don't remember if they mentioned any of that. Is the director here that can answer that?
Yeah, originally, because when we wanted to go to the mariachi festival, we knew we needed to go through international programs. We originally submitted the proposals as a course, an academic component. And then we changed that. We talked with Adiz, the director of international programs, with Steve Cook, and international programs said, that's fine, you can do it as a club trip. You're approved. The ISPAC committee approved it. And so as the proposal was forwarded by the group, it's for a club trip to perform at the mariachi festivals. There will be no choruses associated with it, no fees for courses. The trip is a club trip.
Jess?
Oh, I guess I was just gone, so I don't have it in front of me, but do we know what's the dates associated with this trip?
August 27th through the 7th.
Thank you. So it's over the summer.
Towards the end of the summer.
Yeah. Eric?
And these will all be current students at Central?
They would have to be together.
Yeah.
Further discussion? Entertain motion. Dave?
We also have to remember to add the 360.
That did.
Is it up there? Okay. So the full amount then is 6,178.
Yes.
Okay, I would like to make a motion to fully fund that.
Have a motion to fully fund request 2055. Do we have a second? Is that a second there? Alright. Second by Eric. Alright, we'll do discussion. Fully request. Alex?
So we haven't done this in a while. I am not particularly in favor of funding travel in general.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor of fully requesting request 2055? Opposed? Abstentions? Is that time?
Yep. 333.
We're gonna vote to deny this so you can further the discussion. I just kinda wanna know why people were against it and then why people were for it. Kinda looking at the people that are voting against it, you kinda explain why, so most of the community can know. Alejandro?
So I think this is kind of like the Thailand tour, where it's like all these students aren't really going to necessarily get the opportunity to hear it, so it doesn't really benefit a huge amount of students for the amount that it costs.
Edgar? You voted against it?
Oh no, I would
You voted?
abstain.
Just
But
abstain.
I can still say something.
Yeah.
I mean, I see Alejandro's point, but it's like at the same time we did fund that, so. It's kind of, and it's not like it was just this year; it was last year too, probably the
And the year before too.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm abstaining because I believe if you can't really say yes or no to something, it's better just to abstain.
Eric?
Well, I voted for it because I think it's important that we do send students to represent the school across the world. We are always promoting, and I'm talking about the school, promoting all of the international students that we have coming here and how it enhances our own education experience at Central. And I think for us to do that, we also need to send our students abroad to represent Central around the world. You know, we are a regional university, but we do, as far as I understand, have a large group of international students that do come here to study, and I just feel it's important to make that a two-way street.
Josh? Josh?
I voted in favor of this because I was being consistent with how I've been voting for many things this year. And I particularly like that the amount appeared low to me for international travel because they had quite a few other funding sources. So they weren't asking this committee for the full amount, they were asking for a portion of it, and I thought that was a very positive thing in terms of a request. And the way in which they described the conference and how it ties to the importance of in the world of mariachi to be in the center, I couldn't think of a better place for this group of students to go to further that part of their education. So that was a well-written, well-put-together proposal.
Any further discussion? Seeing none. Make a motion to. I move to fully fund request 2055, $6,178. Eric seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Alright, so moved from the full amount, $6,178. We'll now look at request 2047, which is the NCTM annual meeting of $3,159. Open for discussion.
I thought this was a unique one that comes to this committee because it was students from our Des Moines University Center. I believe that they Skype. It was a Skype in.
Yeah.
And I thought it was great to see students from our university centers doing many of the same things that that our students on our Ellensburg campus are doing. Great idea. Great, well put together club of people from that campus.
Joey?
And I just do want this on the record, not that this is a statement one way or the other what you should do, but I do appreciate the fact that that person Skyped in and stayed with us through the long budget discussion we had, and then actually stayed on for the rest of the meeting and listened in the background. Because even those who come in person don't always stay for the remainder of the meeting. So just for the record that I appreciated this student's commitment too. That is all. Yeah.
I make a motion to fund the full amount of $3,159.
Motion, Dane seconds. Discussion on motion to fully fund request 2047.
To clarify, that was not an endorsement on my behalf. That was just a statement.
Dane?
Yeah, I just think it's another great opportunity to develop professionally, especially for teachers. The country needs good teachers. This is another good opportunity to do so. That's why I'm voting with it.
Shall we move to voting? All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? So moved. So we'll have to fill them out. We'll now look at request 2051, National Conference for Undergrad Research, $527.76. Open on the floor to discussion. Joey?
And I know not everyone has this in front of them, and I do, so I'll share. This one, again, is one student who's requesting to go to this for we'll say $528. Their total cost is just under $1,300, and the remaining they have, the Office of Undergraduate Research is actually providing funding for $750 of it, which is more than half of their request.
When is this trip again?
When is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, in like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, this month. Yeah,
March 26th.
yeah, 25th through the 28th is what they're leaving.
Any discussion? Edgar?
I mean, I think this is a great opportunity for her, and how she's going to be presenting at Source and then at Phi. Yes.
That was canceled.
What?
Yeah.
What was?
Phi Alpha Theta.
Oh, never mind. Still at Source.
Yeah.
So I mean, I see the potential impact on students in the near future.
Yeah,
Dane?
I think it's kind of unique. American Revolutionary War songs. I think that's kind of neat. Like nothing screams nationalism more than that. So American nationalism. So I think that's also good for the school because the school is in America. So I would like to make a motion to fund the full amount of $528.
We have a motion on the table. Edgar, is that a second?
Yes.
Edgar seconds. Discussion on the motion? Yeah, 528.
Yeah.
Alright. No discussion, we move to voting. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? So moved. Fund the full amount, or $528. We'll move to request 2052 Western Psychological Association Conference for $2,680. Open for discussion.
Did they significantly, and I don't remember what, because I missed that in my presentation, lower their initial request? So I don't remember what they were pulling out of it.
I think they were saving the airplane.
Got it. I could look back to the minutes. I realize as I'm speaking.
I don't think they found.
Okay. That makes me feel better.
Any discussion? Is this because everyone's confused on something?
I mean, so you can. I would encourage, again, I think part of Brandon's questions are not knowing, is the silence because people are looking up information, if there is thoughts in favor or opposition, making sure we're discussing that. Again, doesn't mean you all need to be in favor or in opposition, but silence normally either means people are looking stuff up or you've already made a decision. I see several reading things.
They reduced because they overestimated on a couple things, right? Like drastically. Okay. But in the notes, you didn't ask questions, so I was.
Yeah. No. There's his ways. Taking you back to the expenses. Thanks.
Eric?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the full amount of $2,680.
Request to allocate the full amount. Is there a second? Dane seconds. Discussion on the motion. Allocate the full amount. Eric?
So I I'm happy that they they're trying to not have us pay for everything. They're gonna pay for their food. They're gonna lodge with friends and family before they travel. Not have to have airport parking, and that's that's important. So yeah, that's why I'm supportive of it.
Further discussion? Greg?
Just a question, because I wasn't here last week, that's why I'm actually abstaining on all these votes. We'll continue, but is this a class? Dr. Buchanan's Directed Research Lab, is that just some obscure title?
It's not a class. They had brought it up, and I can't remember the way they described it, but it's a group of them that's being advised by those two faculty who work up there, but it's not for credit.
Okay.
They're assisting them, if I remember correctly, with their research pieces outside of the classroom. Yeah.
Okay, so I was just gonna say the same thing. Maybe we should have said it before, I'm abstaining just because I wasn't here last week too.
Okay.
And for those who didn't hear, Jessica's also abstaining for those because she wasn't here last week. My question, I was trying to find it in there and I haven't made it to the part. Do you remember if they were presenting at Source as well? Okay, thank you. I didn't see it in their written piece.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, move to a vote. All those in favor of fully funding request 2052? Opposed? Abstentions? So moved. Funding the full amount. We'll now look at request 2054, National Conference for Undergraduate Research, Students with a Purpose, for $13,066.50. Up to floor discussion. Dane?
I like how this group included an online student in their doing it. Kind of like the Westside Center was kind of related to that, kind of inclusive, which is pretty good. And unique.
Okay.
This also affects multiple colleges, multiple majors on campus.
Joey?
I mean, this, and I'll just say this, I think is a unique one for you all, given that we have two different requests for the same event. So similar things, but I think that the parts to discuss is which things either you were in favor of or what are the differences, because they are approaching it very differently if you look at how they're setting it up and how they're doing it. I mean, one is one individual and the other one is 12? 14. But yeah, just very interesting that you all saw this both the same week, which is not always the case. Unless done intentionally, which this was not done intentionally. These were two individual requests.
Yeah, the big thing to me is like travel. Obviously, one's flying and it's driving, and the one that's flying is obviously more due to the amount of tickets they have to purchase, but also due to the ticket price and the choice of flying. But they felt that was the most efficient.
Edgar?
I make a motion to fund the full amount just because we funded the consistency.
Got a motion on the table to fund the full amount. Is there a second? Alright, without a second, that motion dies. We continue with discussion. Request 2054. Dave?
I have in my notes in the bottom, it says a van maybe for lower transportation, so do you guys remember if they were considering going to a van if it would lower their allocation?
Joey?
They did indicate that in the discussion that was one of the things they were already looking at. I don't believe they had a price for what that would be, but they did mention that, and I think they mentioned a few other things, that if it was lower, how they would cut back on costs. But I don't recall specifically what the other cost-saving pieces were they had said.
March?
Yep.
25th through the 29th. Would it be possible, or what do you guys, what are your thoughts on tabling this for now, requesting a more in-depth budget on a van, so we could get a better amount of how much to allocate?
Come back after that. Jim?
You all can do that and request it. I'd say the only issue you all are going to have is that our next meeting is April 1st, so they would have already gone or not to it. I mean, either way, it's reimbursement within that, but so you can and then see what the cost is afterwards. But yeah, I just want to remind you all we don't meet again until April 1st.
Josh?
And just a point of clarification, if we approve an amount, are they held to that exact same plan, or can they use that amount and switch things up?
So when it comes to, it actually kind of depends on how you vote. But if you voted in what you have been doing in the past, if you approve a figure of, not to get too exact, we'll just pretend it's 15,000, so I don't put any numbers in your head. But they can actually change potentially what their transportation is, as long as it's actually the reimbursement we would look at is transportation. I think for this piece, it can get a little gray, so if you did decide to decrease it, they could actually still fly, but they could actually just pay the difference themselves. So just kind of think about that. But I don't know if that answered your question 100%, Josh.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
And Edgar, you had mentioned being fair with the student that submitted the single request. I wonder, is it fair to kind of use that single request as an estimate, multiply it by 12 or how many people are going and approve that? Would that be more fair in terms of equality with the amount of price per student, or is that completely out of bounds?
Any thoughts?
I don't think so.
Eric, what was it? Eric?
I don't think so.
Dave?
So basically just to follow up, so we can make a motion to allot them a certain amount of money, but we can also recommend a travel source, or is that up to them still, even though that's just everything?
I would say you are able to do that. I would advise for you to stick with a dollar figure, so that could allow them to have some certain decisions on how they would travel.
Greg?
So if we went with what Josh suggested, it probably almost cuts it in about half. And so then it's a dollar figure that is being approved. Could they decide, well, okay, only 9 of us can go instead of 14, and that's their option also? Right, okay.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, essentially, depending on how you all put the motion forward, but again, being consistent with how you have been this year, is just putting forward a dollar figure of X amount. Then, as long as it's really still within the what the request is, they can choose to either they're going to take a bus or cars, or they're going to fly, or, and this is, we've had multiple groups in the past come up and say, if we don't get fully funded, that means instead of the 14 of us, 8 of us are going, or however much it will cover, dependent on what people can pay themselves. And so that's really up to them. We have no say on that at that point.
Josh?
Just a point of clarification for the notes. I didn't suggest that. I was just asking if that seemed like a fair thing.
Eric?
I'd like to make a motion to approve $7,378 for the swap conference trip.
Is that the right amount that you just said?
Yeah.
Okay.
7378. Yes.
We got a motion to fund request 2054, $7,378. Do we have a second?
Can we just,
You have to second first.
Second. All right, Dane seconds. Discussion.
can you explain how you got the number, just so we all know?
I multiplied 527 by 14 people.
Okay.
There we go. Further discussion? Seeing none, move to a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? So moved. On request 2054, $7,378.
Yeah.
Okay. With that, we'll move to the next part of the agenda, which is other business communications received. Edgar?
Yeah.
Wanna start us off?
So each one of you has that packet. And the first 2 pages, the first page is kind of, it has different things in it. So I know we want to look at numbers, but I don't really think that we can do that in this case, right? So we can't really measure student impact using numbers. So I felt that, well, first of all, it says right here, if we want to know how many students use the area and their demographics, we need to be able to kind of, I suggested providing the software or the hardware to do that, because a lot of the areas don't have a streamlined way to do it. Just like, I don't know, just came up and presented, was it theater? Yeah, like theater, they can keep track of how many people go, how many student tickets they sell, but not a lot of other areas do that. And the way CWU doesn't really do that. And we have a spreadsheet, but we don't really keep track of who comes all the time. And though, if we're looking at the visitors, the amount of visitors that visit an area, we need to look at the amount of unique visitors visit, right? So, like the rec center came and they did about 380,000 visits. I'm not so sure, but who's to say that's not one student joining in 20 times a day, right? Some of the areas or like potential KPIs that I thought, and along with my subcommittee, were the number of students that utilize the area, staff to student ratio, retention rate, amount of pro staff, amount of student staff, how active are students in the area, what practice, and I like this one, what practices are set in place to promote the growth of students professionally, personally, and education-wise. Types of student-led initiatives, student money being used by student money, if that makes sense. How is feedback gathered and taken into consideration? If any departments or areas work together, I put ASU partnering with CWU Wellness. How does this area grow CWU's relationship with Ellensburg or its respective university center community? Which I don't know if that could really be applied since it's. But we do fund Camp CWU, which is not really for students. What value does this area bring to CWU students? So it's like a self-evaluation type of question, and I think it's the best way to do this. Just letting an area determine theirs, I guess, not to mean in a bad way, but their self-worth, that makes sense, and letting the committee next year determine if that's sufficient enough. Define issues that your area tries to address. How does this service improve students' experience at CWU? Will this provide a service or activity that has not been provided before? What would the impact be? Oh, I forgot. Be if this area was to not be funded next year. So yeah, my recommendation was if we want data on the amount of students that use this area, we need to provide hardware and software to do that. So like the rec center does the swiping. I think the veteran center does that too. I also think that they should be more transparent. At the time, I thought that the music department just felt like they didn't need to answer most of the questions that we sent out, but that was just miscommunication. Let's see. And when I talk about seeing 2 different values when it comes to requests that happen on campus versus off campus, for example, like if someone wants to go, like the one that we just voted on, right? Present at a conference, come back and present at Source or in their club. I personally believe that has more of an impact than, I don't know, some students going somewhere just for a field trip, if that makes sense. Like nothing really being brought back to campus. The last little part with those colors, that's for something else. that's where the difference sheet. But you got Joey made the next 2 pages, and then I made a nice little pie chart, so you can visually see where all the money goes. That's pretty much all I have. It's not final.
But these are your categories.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to categorize it. City government, childcare, essentially, student media, support costs, for the bond, and then support study and all that stuff.
I was just gonna say, I shared them with them. Lacey's actually the one who compiled them, so I don't get credit for it.
Thank you.
Well, and just for the piece of these categories, is these categories actually tie straight to the Killian?
Yeah.
So I think some of these categories can be pretty vague, so if you guys have any feedback about that, this is just kind of a suggestion. Some of them are pretty obvious, like the childcare one, but when you get into some of the other ones, like we have a pretty big support cost one, which is kind of a vague category, so just, I want to put that out there.
Does anybody have any questions?
Are there goals around percent of allocation within these categories, or have we had those discussions? So maybe the committee says, we only want to have our budget go to, 35% go to support costs. And it's up to 42%, so we need to think through that. Just wondering if there's goals in those categories that we think are acceptable for spending these funds on.
And I'll say there hasn't been, and some of this is going to be, I appreciate Edgar and the subcommittee with this, and Lacey really identified these. We haven't identified them in this manner previously, and that's been some of the conversation is how can we categorize them, because certain things don't compare. If you're looking at admin fee versus ECLC, you're not going to have comparable. But that's part of the discussion that we're going to look to have as we go into spring quarter. Some of the pieces we have on the agenda is what is the committee do you all want to identify as things really to recommend for next year? Because really the big part of this when we look at this is going to come up with the base funding, and all the base funding requests come up next year. And so next year's committee is going to go through and review every one of these and determine the new base funding for the quadrennium after that. So really providing some feedback and guidance, and I think having it viewed in this manner does create a different discussion conversation of do we feel this is how we want the money divided up, keeping in mind that this is kind of how we created this piece. Do we feel that more should be going here or more should be going there? And really for you all to discuss and figure out how we want to assess that and then provide that recommendation for next year's committee, who's going to be the ones spending, last time it was about 40 hours total reviewing requests over the course of winter quarter.
Just one piece about the categories that I think is important moving forward. So the concepts that we discuss here and for the next future committee is there's some areas that are on this list that don't do any programming at all. Circuit counting is one of them. And so I think that when we talk about some of these questions that are on the front page, I think there's some of them that can apply to, circuit counting. We could address those questions, and then there's others that wouldn't necessarily be questions that we could answer, which are fine to put that out there, but then at least if we have categories, we could maybe, fine tune some of those per category KPIs or, some items that we think are important. The other piece is the support costs for the facilities and bonds. Those are, unfortunately, there's not a lot of color in those. Those are pretty, goods and services and staffing. And so there's certain things that I just wanted to put out there to understand that there might not be as much programming or details out there, but they still do serve a pretty important piece to the student experience, just in a different manner.
So just like Edgar clarifying, like these are kind of like your key performance indicators that you can the subcommittee.
Yeah, and I, after thinking about a lot of them and looking at the way that this committee votes is we tend to focus a lot on student impact. So that should be the if we're comparing travel and supplementals, how does that impact on campus, and it's specifically on campus, right? So how does it all bring, I guess, knowledge or an impact to students here on campus? Either in Augsburg, Des Moines, Pierce, all of the university centers.
Alright, so like these KPIs for the base fund areas are pretty much focused around the impact on the student body. Cool. Eric?
This is a question for you, Lacey. Do you see it would be too work intensive to, if we were to say these are the KPIs and then specifically creating it as an a la carte list, not for them to choose, but for us to choose. So we'll use music as an example. We're sending this, how does, staff to student ratio, because they're requesting money for travel. So we want these certain questions. We're sending it to the CERC, or for the sub fee, or not sub fee, the CERC building. We would send them different questions from the list because they're not answering the same things, I guess.
I think I understand where you're going with that, and I agree. I do think if we put these areas in categories, we can have questions that are probably more unique. So just to kind of throw Cherie or the director of student union in there. There's going to be other questions to ask her other than travel type of questions or even programming questions. So I would say I think that would be a great idea to think about that, is to have a list of KPIs and then maybe fit which ones would fit in each category. But I do think when you look at this list, I think a lot of them have some comparable pieces. And so you could almost say, okay, well, these KPIs are going to really be for, student government, because student government is going to be operating differently than, pep band or campus activities or homecoming and some of those. So I think that would be a pretty good idea. And there might be some overlap in those categories, and I think that would be fine. But then it would give those operational areas an opportunity to maybe answer questions that are more important to those areas and how they function. So like custodial, like how, you could ask more questions about operations of what those costs look like on those specific areas.
Josh?
Will there be representatives from these groups that come next year before this group? And so something that I was thinking of is, these are all such unique, different areas with unique goals and purposes. So the KPIs are probably going to be different. Instead of just a single, you could have some KPIs that are like how many students, are use these services. That's one, but that may not get at the point or the purpose of what these. So I'm wondering if it might be a good idea to ask each of these areas to bring to this group. This is how I measure the success of this program, and then we can either say, well, yeah, it's a good measurement, or that's a lame one. We also want you to measure these three other things. And that can be the modality that measures some level of accountability or decision making for this body to determine if it's meeting the goals or not meeting the goals that you intend and they intend for the program or the program to meet.
I was just going to say, I think they kind of answer that in their questionnaires, don't they? Of how they measure the value of what they're doing. Or is the question kind of?
I'd say yes to answer that with the supplemental questionnaire
Yes.
we sent this year. Yeah, that has not always been the case. Yeah, and some of this really is. Going back. I apologize. I know you nodded your head in my direction, so I'm counting that. Really is for next year. Josh, like you said, every one of these groups has to come and present to re-ask for funding, as well as we have no idea what else will come forward. So that's the other part of, I think, us having some general ideas of categories, general questions that we know the committee values, like here's how we're determining the value of the funding. But also we're going to have to be adaptable to that because there's going to be a request coming in that we have no idea. So it's kind of hard to know in advance until it comes there and you're like, okay, this one could fall in this category, or maybe it doesn't fit in any of these and this is a new one. But it's prepping as much as we can, because I think asking the questions as we're assessing base funding, and then once we've done the allocation of the base funding, saying, okay, here's your allocation and here's the performance indicators we as a committee are going to be looking at over the next 4 years to determine if you're hitting the purpose of why we're giving you the funding.
Josh?
From a historical standpoint, has this committee ever denied or reduced? And what decision process did they use to do that?
Yes. And the decision process, I mean, we can go into more, because I know we're going to talk about a lot of the spring quarter. They have both reduced and denied requests. And a lot of it is based on some of the criteria pieces that we've looked at, going back to this, of what is the funding part of it. Nothing will go before the committee that's not allowable, similar to what we do with supplemental funds. So it really comes down to the priority levels of what we're looking at, where do they fall priority-wise, and then a lot of it does come down to the student discussion, because most of the times it's an area that's maybe not spending their allocation. So coming in, the committee's like, you haven't been using this, we're going to cut this down. Or some areas have actually come in and the committee has said, we're not going to fund this anymore because you have sufficient other funding outside of this. Or we see value in this, we just don't have enough funds available. We'd encourage you to try and find others or come and ask for supplemental.
Lacey?
Well, not to totally derail this conversation about KPIs, but to talk about base funding for next year, is that I would like to propose a couple of different changes for base funding process. And that actually hits, Josh, what you said kind of hits on a nose here for me, because there's been decisions made at the table that haven't always been very clear of why.
Yeah.
Which is why we're always asking, okay, why are you voting that way? What is the purpose? So that so I can take that back to those areas and really make sure they understand that. And so a couple of pieces of that is going to be more of an itemized budget. So instead of reducing it by, we'll just say 20% because of funding, would to be really go through and say we're reducing the overall by 20%, or we're reducing the staffing line, or we're reducing the goods and services line, or depending on what the request looks like. And so that is something that Joey and I will be working on, and it's something that we also want it to be online, so they would be submitting it online. Because if I could bring up the binder from base funding from 3 years ago, it's this big, it's a lot of paper, it's a lot of work, and so that would be kind of my process for that base funding. So I'm just going to slip that in that conversation.
Josh?
Sorry to keep asking questions. I'm thinking, I'm a futuristic guy, so I'm always thinking about the future. But now I'm trying to figure out, all of you students in your shoes right now, what are the questions you're asking about this? And the only thing I can think of is, if you're answering like two questions, do we want to increase or decrease student fees? Or kind of the adverse of that, or goes along with that, do we want to increase or decrease services that we think are valuable? I don't know what other questions you're thinking of in your mind when you're preparing to approach this sort of topic. But from those, then it would, because if you're like, we're happy with everything, we're happy with the level of fees that we're paying, we're happy with the level of services, then it's just kind of same old, like, yeah, we approve these and go on. But I'm trying to understand, what are the other decision-making thoughts in your mind of where you want to spend your fees?
I think one of those questions is, which of these things should fall under a student fee? So for example, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure ECLC is now under auxiliary services, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one of those things where it's like, so this isn't in our department anymore. Why is auxiliary services not paying for that? So I think there's a middle ground there where it's like, it's not necessarily that we want to get rid of this service or we want to change it. I think there's a part where it's like, okay, maybe we do want to keep this service, but we want to reevaluate where this fund's coming from, and why are funds coming from a certain place. So I think that's one of the things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of on the same boat with Alex here. I think there's a lot of things that we don't know as students too. A lot of questions that haven't been asked before. I think we're finally on like the right track to start getting to those questions and learning more about like kind of what you're talking about with the KPIs, like where's the impact, where's this money going, and then kind of going where Alex is going. Like we had no idea. Like this isn't our department anymore. how does this affect us, and then we kind of start tracking it down that way, and then we see really what services we want and don't want, and then we can kind of go from there. Not necessarily talk about fees.
I think a lot of that too is like, there are some of these that are, in my opinion, way more tied to other academic departments. That honestly, I think a lot of those decisions should go to the academic departments, how much they fund them up, if they're willing to spend some of their budget on those things, as opposed to, and I know everything that we have is allowable and everything that we have is geared toward, this is an outside of the classroom experience. I still think just like the, what department is this in type thing. Looking at some of those things that are pretty tied to an academic department and saying like, if this is more of your thing, then you should probably evaluate how valuable it is to you and whether you want to spend money on that.
So just a recent, what'd you think about the theater arts? And I mean, that's one, when I look at departments, that's a recent one that came up. So what's your thinking around something like that?
I think part of that, and one of the reasons I asked the question of how I guess I didn't ask it clearly, but she answered it very clearly, which was how is the employment tied to the academic department? And I think going along with student tickets sold versus how many students those are the things I would want to look at, like, okay, how many actual students are attending these things, what percentage of the student population is attending those things. If it's, I liked what she answered about the employment not just being in theater, that kind of shows me, okay, there is a little bit more of a broader scope that they're reaching here. It's not just, it's just a bunch of theater department students that are being employed there or going to their shows and all that stuff. If it was, and again, we don't really have all the numbers for that, so I don't know if I can say this with certainty, but if it was, that's the thing I would evaluate, like, is this more of a theater department thing than it is S&A thing? But I think that's still a question for like the tickets, what is 1,800, that's what, like 15% of our students. So it's not bad, but I think but that's just student tickets. That's not how many students.
One thing that I love this discussion, but one I wanted to bring back to the categories is during spring quarter we will be reviewing the annual reports. So this is their financial documents along with their questionnaires being answered, and we're actually grouping them by those categories. So I think it would be great for us, and Joy and I have talked about like the schedule of when those will go, and we can actually let those areas know that their program will be, or their annual reports will be viewed during the committee meeting. And I would say that would give them the opportunity to be here just in case when we do go through those, if there are questions, we could maybe ask them right now, meaning like this year, and document that for the future years, would be my advice.
Dave?
Yes. I just have a question, like, sort of, and playing like devil's advocate, I guess. In the inverse of like eliminating groups like this, are there groups that we'd like to cover with the S&A fee? Are those, do those exist, or I don't know?
I think one of the, and maybe we can just talk about what our thoughts are on this. Oh, it's the same topic. One of the KPIs that I was a little bit more iffy on is, will this provide a service or activity that has not been provided before? I think a better starting place would be a service or activity that has not been provided for that is needed. So I don't think just because there's an area that is new and we haven't seen before doesn't mean it's going to add something. So I think we need to apply the same level of, and I know it's harder when you have to project out, like, okay, this hasn't existed before. What do you project is going to be the student impact is going to be different than like we have numbers from how you've been doing for the past couple of years or whatever. But I think that's one of those things where I would still want to stay a little bit more on the side of evaluating, I guess, possible impact based on something a little bit more solid. So is there a program like this? Do you have other programs at other schools like this that we can gauge off of, and not just, oh, we haven't seen this one before, let's fund it, everything. Not that that would be how we would approach it, but
Well, and I like where you're going with that, Alex. I would almost go not as a, is it needed? Because anyone who's bringing forward the request is going to say yes. I'm going to tell you that's the hardest part is you're going to get, the committee next year will have 70, 80 potentially requests, and everyone coming forward is going to tell you why it's important and what the impact is. So I think it's that will this provide a service activity that's not been provided for? If it's a yes, then how can you articulate that it's needed, or what evidence do you have, or what data do you have to show? And if it's like we have 3,000 students here who have all filled out this thing saying they want that, great, that's the answer. If it's well, Josh thought this up as a great idea and Joey seconded it in the office because it sounded cool, maybe that's not as relevant. But this is all great. I mean, and again, I don't want to necessarily stop the discussion, but I do know we're discussing it a lot more. I know the subcommittee's still doing work on it, so I appreciate that. And this is pretty much what this final document will be is really kind of the end goal of, by the end of spring quarter, we have an idea. So the committee coming back next year, who again, anyone who's here next year, I'd highly encourage you. This is not meant to dissuade you, but next year's committee will have a lot of work to do. As I said, it's quite the arduous task to go through all the base funding, because the discussion we're having right now, we have in the fall to set what our goals and priorities are before we know what's in, and we have no idea what comes in, and then we have to hear everything, and then spend quite a considerable amount of time deliberating, going through each request individually, asking these questions. What is the relevance? Do we see importance? Yeah.
I just had to say, because you had mentioned the tracking ability, that is common at some institutions where you swipe in. This has been a conversation in areas like student success and other areas. What services are you using? It's often used as a retention tool. So we at the university are able to identify if a student hasn't swiped into anything in a while, and you're like, oh, they're probably not engaged. They haven't gone to a game. They haven't gone to the tutoring center. They haven't, so maybe we need to reach out to them and see how they're doing. These are great tools that we've talked about using at the institution, what that would look like, even to the point of what would it cost to put in all classrooms so we could take attendance that way. So we could reach out to students if they miss class. I know it sounds maybe to students like too much micromanaging, but it helps to know where to put the services and the university allocated funds in areas that need it the most. So I think I personally think that's a good suggestion, or I don't know if it was a suggestion or recommendation, but you noted it here, and it would also help get at some of these other KPIs that you're talking about. And even if the same student swipes 10 times, that's still a KPI. Gives you an idea of the usage. Maybe not the idea of the unique amount of students, but with the swipe, you can identify that as well. So out of 1,000 of these, how many are unique students? I think that's something that you should all consider, and maybe even partner in with other funding sources. So if it's going to cost $1 million to put these all, I just made that number up, all over the university. The university says I only have 500,000, and you say, well, we have 500,000. Again, made up numbers, and maybe it could be I don't know if that's something you can do. We're got to check the laws and the regs, but it's a good idea, I think, and it would give this committee longevity insights into the type of funding you should or shouldn't be awarding.
Great.
I think all great ideas. Just maybe a word of caution that numbers don't always mean it's better than something above. There are, and I don't have any examples, but it shouldn't be the only gauge.
Okay.
I would agree, and I think that's what the committee's trying to determine,
Yeah.
because if it was just numbers, that makes our life a lot easier, but it's figuring out those other pieces. Additionally, I do have another communication received when we're done with this that I want to share before someone makes a motion to exit.
There's still public comment.
Yeah. I'm telling him before we move on.
Yeah, but thank you, your communications received. Joey?
So I did receive a communication from a student who wanted me to share this during that part because they couldn't be here for public comment, so did want to provide feedback and concerns that they had. So, and some of this because we discussed it with this being a public thing that I'm not going to share their name, just the reference. So Really saying, and they said it's fine if I refer to them as Mr. Davis. They said they're senior here at Central Washington University. Upon the video review of the meeting, the 26th of February, the student drew grave concern with specifically the reasoning provided in regards to denying supplemental funding request 2045, which was the ROTC request that came up. The motion made at the February 26th meeting was as follows. Motion that we deny it because I see the value in what they are doing and how it's going to affect them after they leave Central. However, I don't really see a huge impact on the current students because they're all graduating seniors, and the trip is at the end of March. For how much it is, I don't know what's going to have the impact that we want it to, especially if that's kind of something we pride ourselves on looking for, is the impact of the greater body of Central. As provided in the motion, the supplemental funding contained graduating seniors being denied specifically on the grounds that the individuals were graduating seniors, and that the impact on them was deemed not a huge impact on the current students because they're graduating seniors and the trip is at the end of March. As stated and reiterated often by the advisors of the committee, all requests that come before the committee are allowable expenses. It is innate then from this line of reasoning that it is the superstitious, prejudicial policy of the S&A Committee to discriminate against graduating seniors. Their requests and petitions based solely on the fact that they are graduating seniors, as all requests that come before the committee are allowable. Furthermore, it's clear that the S&A Committee views with inequity all persons who pay S&A dues, the very source of S&A funds. The certain members of the contributing funds have more right of access to these funds than others, solely based on credit hours and labels. I also wish to incontrovertibly dispel something the S&A member stated in reasoning their petition. Graduating seniors are current students, and they pay the same fees as everyone else. And then really went into just a piece on mine, which was not necessarily to be shared, about requesting refund of their specific S&A fees, given their concerns of how the allocation was determined, and felt that it was essentially concerned that the rationale of denying it was based on the individuals being graduating seniors, and that they felt it was discriminatory towards graduating seniors. So I've already responded to the individual and had communication with them, but as requested, shared their concerns with you all as a committee.
Any more public comment? Or no, it's
Now we'll
communication.
do, yeah, that was communication.
Let's move on to the next part. Public comment, second call. Lacey?
I'll make mine really quick. I just want to do full transparency. One of the S&A requests that I moved down to the bottom was an S&A request that I did on behalf of the committee. And I just want to let you guys know that it's really kind of my move to try to turn all the funding situations to electronic. So the request is actually for tablets, which I will do more during the request, but I just wanted to set that out there that it would be actually for the S&A committee members to basically view everything electronically as opposed to paper. Yeah. So just to plant that seed. If it's not something that is favorable, that is completely understanding.
It can be discussed at the time of the request next quarter.
Josh? I wanted to thank Edgar and the subcommittee that worked on this and put it together. Thanks for putting that together. I love the categories and the thought you put into that, so thanks. Never mind. That's it.
We're not meeting until April 1st. Don't show up next week or the week after. Good luck with finals.
Edgar? Eric seconds. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? So moved. During the meeting at 7:29.